literally, it happens all the time. And it's funny because you get into those scenarios, and I think I know everything.
For more than a decade, millions of people believed they knew exactly who Frank Fritz was. Then Danielle Colby began sharing stories that painted a very different picture, revealing a man whose private struggles were far more complicated than the easygoing picker fans watched every week. Who was Frank Fritz when the cameras stopped rolling? And why do Danielle's memories make some of the biggest moments in American pickers look completely different today? Join us as we uncover the side of Frank Fritz that rarely made it to television. The woman who saw everything from behind the desk. Back in January 2010, the History Channel rolled out a show about two men digging through piles of actual garbage in old barns. Nobody expected a show about hoarding to become a massive cable TV hit. Mike Wolfe and Frank Fritz spent years driving around the country buying rusty junk. Meanwhile, Danielle Colby sat back in Iowa, keeping the whole circus from burning down. She ran the antique archaeology office, dealt with endless phone calls, and handled the daily chaos so the guys could keep playing in the dirt. That job gave Danielle something no fan, producer, or tabloid ever had: a front-row seat to the real relationship between Mike and Frank. She watched the two men build an empire together, and she watched the cracks form long before the public ever noticed anything was wrong. For more than a decade, she said almost nothing about what she saw. Danielle's friendship with Mike predated the cameras, and she has described their families as permanently intertwined. She once called him a big brother and said there was no divorcing from one another, a bond that would later put her in an impossible position when the show began to fracture. Frank was the relatable one. He had this everyday humor that television executives can never actually fake, and people loved him for it. But while he seemed easygoing on camera, a massive storm was building behind the scenes, and Danielle had a front-row seat to the whole disaster. Frank and Mike actually went back decades, long before the TV cameras showed up. They were just two working-class kids from the Quad Cities who liked bicycles and old trash. By the time fame hit, they already had a lifetime of baggage. At its peak, the show dragged in over 5 million viewers every single week. That meant a tiny shop in the middle of Iowa suddenly became a massive tourist trap. Danielle turned into a celebrity herself. She was a burlesque dancer covered in tattoos, which definitely gave the network executives a mild panic attack. But while the money and fame rolled in, she watched the two hosts head in opposite directions, because the Frank Fritz that fans loved on screen was only half of the story. The real Frank behind the camera. On television, Frank was the wisecracking sidekick with an eye for motorcycles, oil cans, and anything with a story attached. He called himself the common man's picker. He once joked that his ideal fan was the guy who buys a 30-pack of beer and a pizza on the weekend, and the guy who spends $150 on a sign instead of $8,000. That humility made him arguably the most relatable star on the network. According to Danielle, the real Frank was not just some simple, happy-go-lucky guy on a screen. He was a lot more complicated. In her interviews after he died, she talked about how his sharp sense of humor was basically the glue holding the entire cast together. But that humor was also a shield. He rarely let anyone get close enough to see the actual person hiding underneath the jokes. She said she missed the rare moments when he was emotionally vulnerable, the times he would call her for advice or simply reach out for a hug. Those moments were glimpses of a man who felt far more than he ever showed. She also revealed the small human things that bonded them. Frank loved his cat. He loved his mother. He loved talking about tattoos, a passion he shared with Danielle, whose body art became part of her own public identity. Although Danielle spoke kindly about Frank, she also revealed a sadder side of his story. She watched his illness gradually take over his life, making the final years of their friendship very difficult. Looking back now, the early seasons of American Pickers feel different. The jokes about Frank's health, his unexpected absences, and the times he looked tired no longer seem harmless. Instead, they appear to have been warning signs that many viewers did not recognize at the time. Danielle saw those changes long before the audience did because she knew Frank both on and off camera. She knew the man viewers saw on television, and she also knew the man who was struggling in private. And the first public sign of that darkness arrived in the summer of 2021, in an interview that blew the entire franchise apart. The interview that ended a 40-year brotherhood. In July 2021, Frank sat down with a tabloid and detonated a bomb under American Pickers. He revealed that he had not spoken to Mike Wolfe in 2 years. He said Mike never called to check on him after a major back surgery. He claimed the show was tilted 1,000% toward his co-star, and he openly suggested that Mike wanted to replace him with his own brother, Robbie. A few days later, the split became official. Mike jumped on social media to announce Frank was done with the show, wrapping the news in a fake nice speech about brotherhood and praying for his future. To absolutely nobody's surprise, viewers saw right through the PR statement. Frank did not just sit back and take the fake sentiment. In a follow-up interview, he completely trashed Mike's post. He claimed that in 10 entire years of working together, his childhood buddy had barely managed to say 5 nice things to his face. And just like that, a friendship that started when they were teenagers in Iowa completely imploded in public. What made the moment even heavier was what Frank admitted, alongside the anger. He had been through rehab for alcohol. He had lost 65 pounds. He was managing Crohn's disease and recovering from surgery. This was not just a contract dispute. This was a man fighting several battles at once and losing his television family in the middle of them. Fans immediately picked sides. Some blamed Mike for abandoning a struggling friend. Others believed Frank's own choices had forced the network's hand. Everyone wanted to know what the third member of the trio thought, and that was Danielle. For a TV show built entirely on 2 buddies hanging out, this was a total public relations disaster. Ratings dropped the second Frank vanished from the screen. Angry fans flooded every single comment section the network owned to complain. People pointed out that the entire soul of the show was the banter between the 2 hosts. If one half of the duo gets kicked to the curb, the magic instantly dies. The remaining host is just some guy standing alone in a barn, overpaying for a rusty metal sign. The truth is that Frank had already been absent from the show since March 2020, when he stepped away for back surgery during the pandemic. For over a year, viewers were told almost nothing. The network kept airing episodes, Mike kept picking, and the empty seat in the van simply went unexplained. That long silence allegedly allowed resentment to harden on both sides. So by the time Frank finally spoke, the wound had been festering for years. And when she finally spoke, her words landed like a slap that fans still argue about to this day. The post that turned fans against Danielle. On August 2nd, 2021, Danielle finally posted on Instagram, and it absolutely stunned her followers. She put up a photo with Mike, calling him her best friend and big brother, making it clear she had his back. Right when Frank was going through the absolute worst period of his life, she publicly chose a side, and she did not choose him. Then she dropped the lines that people would bring up for years. She wrote that Frank brought all this pain on himself, that it was hard to watch, and that people need to take responsibility when their actions make everyone else suffer. She ended by saying she hoped he would finally get some help after years of being sick. The backlash was strong. Frank's fans flooded her comment sections, accusing her of attacking a sick man when he was already struggling. The criticism was so intense that she reportedly turned off comments on her posts, choosing to end the discussion instead of wearing herself out, trying to defend herself. Danielle, for her part, said that her words were being misinterpreted. She claimed the tabloids were purposely taking her comments out of context because she wouldn't give them interviews, and she made it clear that all she really wanted was for everyone involved to get better and to keep caring for each other during tough times. But the damage was done. To a large portion of the fan base, Danielle was no longer the neutral heart of the show. She was allegedly part of the machine that had pushed Frank out. What almost nobody understood at the time was that her frustration reportedly came from somewhere much more personal. She had spent a decade watching a friend destroy himself, and she was powerless to stop it. There was also a whole other level of drama going on behind the scenes that most viewers never picked up on. Word is, Danielle and Frank had been bumping heads for years before any of this spilled into public view. The people in Frank's corner saw her constant defense of Mike as clear proof that the network had settled on its favorite a long time ago. Whether there was any truth to that or not, that kind of suspicion is exactly what wiped out any remaining chance of peace between two people who used to be genuine friends. The little family that fans had welcomed into their homes for over a decade was now fractured down the middle, and anyone who loved them both was left with no neutral ground to stand on. What happened to Frank next would make the entire feud feel tragically small. The race against time. In July 2022, roughly a year after everyone found out he got kicked off the show, Frank Fritz suffered a massive stroke. Someone found him unconscious on the floor and rushed him to the hospital. But the damage was already done. His health took such a massive hit that he could no longer take care of himself. Eventually, a court had to step in and appoint a guardian to manage his daily life and handle his money. The screaming match eventually fizzled out. Tabloids moved on to the next disaster, and the angry online rants just stopped. The occasional health updates that followed made one thing painfully clear. The sharp, funny guy from the early seasons was gone for good. It is a pretty depressing reality check. A loud, public fight over absolute nonsense is bad, but watching a TV network replace a human being without missing a beat is much worse. But inside that silence, something remarkable was reportedly happening. Mike quietly returned to Frank's side. The two men, who had supposedly not spoken in years, began repairing 4 decades of friendship away from the cameras that had both made and broken them. Mike later confirmed the reconciliation and revealed just how far it went. He said he felt blessed to be at Frank's side when he took his last journey home, a detail that stunned fans who assumed the two had died as enemies. Danielle basically disappeared when it came to anything involving Frank. She did not provide any updates or stray comments. Everything was complete radio silence. That was a huge change for someone who got trolled in 2021 for saying too much. Naturally, people started reading into the silence. Some fans were convinced the guilt was eating away at her. Others figured she was simply grieving in advance, steadying herself for an ending she could already see on the horizon. The reports coming out during that stretch painted a lonely picture. Frank was living a quiet life in Iowa, surrounded by a handful of loyal friends, while his money and his health were left in other people's hands. The stroke had reportedly taken away his ability to ever pick again. And picking was the thing that had defined his entire adult life. For a guy who built his days around barns, back roads, and rusty treasure, losing all of that probably stung far worse than anything a tabloid ever wrote about him. Then, on the last day of September 2024, the news everyone feared finally arrived. A goodbye written to a road dog. Frank died on September 30th, 2024, at 60 years old. According to reports, his death certificate said it was a stroke brought on by cerebrovascular disease, with heart and lung issues listed as contributing factors. His birthday was only weeks away when he passed, and the tributes from fans started flooding in almost immediately. For millions of viewers, Frank was never just some guy on a TV show. He was part of the Saturday afternoon routine, a voice they had welcomed into their living rooms for more than 10 years. Mike shared the news with a broken heart, calling Frank a dreamer who was just as sensitive as he was funny, and saying the man off camera was the same man fans saw on screen. Danielle's goodbye was different. It was intimate, specific, and full of the small details only a real friend would know. She wrote a tribute ending with the words, "Rest in peace, Road Dog," saying she would miss his ability to make everyone laugh, his epic collections, and above all, those little glimpses of vulnerability. When Frank passed away, Danielle posted a tribute mentioning how they used to bond over his cat and his mom. She talked about the things they shared offline. What she did not talk about was their massive, years-long feud. There was no mention of that brutal 2021 Instagram post where she basically told the world he brought his problems on himself. And of course, the post instantly made fans ask the same question. If she actually cared about him that much, why did things get so incredibly ugly in the end? Why was there so much bad blood? For over a year, she just kept her mouth shut and gave absolutely no answers. What Danielle finally admitted. In December 2025, more than a year after Frank's passing, Danielle sat down for a long live stream alongside her husband and finally let her guard down. The conversation wandered from bird photography to old computer games before it eventually landed on American pickers. And what she said next changed everything fans thought they knew about her relationship with Frank. For the first time, Danielle made a clear distinction between the two versions of Frank. She admitted she loved her time with him way more before substance overuse took over, and confessed that things got incredibly dark once the illness took control. It was the most honest statement she had ever put out. Suddenly, that brutal 2021 post made a lot more sense. The woman fans hated for betraying Frank was actually describing the absolute nightmare of watching an addict destroy themselves while everyone else stood around completely helpless. Her harshest comments did not come from malice. They came from utter exhaustion and a broken heart. Right around then, Danielle dropped another massive bomb, telling everyone the show was completely dead after 27 seasons. That forced Mike to crawl out of the woodwork and instantly damage control the situation. Whether the whole circus actually ends there or not, Danielle's comments basically sounded like a person slamming the door on a chapter of her life that made her famous, made her rich, and cost her a friend. Through everything, she kept her public memory of Frank surprisingly decent. She still talked about how his quick wit was the only thing holding the entire cast together, called his death a massive loss for his hometown and his fans, and said she was still grateful for the bizarre, chaotic ride they went through. The public fighting, the sudden firing, and the trashy tabloid headlines were not the actual story. The real story was just a decades-long friendship, a brutal illness, and a goodbye that happened way too soon. Her honesty also made the network look incredibly bad. Fans started asking why a struggling guy was just erased from the show with zero explanation. They wanted to know why the television executives paid to tell human stories chose to stay completely silent, while a real, messy human tragedy was happening right under their noses. Those questions just got swept under the rug. Maybe that is why her recent statement actually hit home for people. She did not try to clean up Frank's image, but she did not trash him either. She just described a guy who was funny but defensive, generous but sick, and totally isolated when things got bad. It is a messy, realistic picture that only someone who spent 15 years working next to him could actually draw. It also leaves viewers with a pretty uncomfortable realization about the people they watch on reality TV. Do you think Danielle's honesty about Frank's struggles was an act of love, or did she say too much too soon? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.